Welcome. People are rolling in. Give it a few seconds.
We'll give the software just a minute to let people roll in here. We have a really well-attended webinar, so we're excited to get everyone in. So we'll get started in just a few minutes. Some folks are really good at being right at the hour. Other folks are jumping in from other meetings. So we'll give you just a few minutes to settle in and take that next swig of coffee, which I'll do now.
And while you're coming in, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. We'd love to hear where you're from, who you are, any questions you might have. Okay, perfect. I think since we have limited time with you and we have a lot to chat about, I'm gonna kick it off. I'd love to introduce you to our panelists. First, I'm gonna be your moderator today. I am Lauren Ellison. I work for LeadSquared. I've been here for about 2.5 years. Prior to that, I worked in higher education in 10 years, and most recently as head of admissions for a school. So for some of you, I've been in your shoes, and I'm going to hand it over to Douglas to introduce himself.
Lauren, I appreciate that. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Douglas Carlson. I lead business development and partnerships here for LeadSquared, and really have been able to be on both sides of the fence. I actually started my career as a university admission counselor at Southern New Hampshire University, so it was really a fantastic experience. And I've also led business divisions at Penn Foster Education Group, which, for those of you who aren't familiar, one of the largest online education providers in the world. So have been on both sides of the proprietary versus not-for-profit education and seen a lot of different roles and a lot of different tech systems. So excited to share a little bit more about that. So Alan, I'll kick it over to you.
Thanks, Douglas. I'm Alan Garber. I'm the Vice President and General Manager of Diamond Student Information Systems. And like Douglas, I have a long history in education. Specifically, I ran a technical trade school in Florida for almost 20 years. I did everything from admissions to cleaning the bathrooms. So I've been in your shoes, and I'm excited to see this presentation and add to it as we go through it. It's really an interesting relationship between the student who comes to your school and is interested, and through the life cycle, how the two relate to each other. So I'm going to kick it over to Cassie for the next introduction.
I'm Cassie Ferrer. I'm the Director of Client Success with Diamond. Going along with the common theme across the four of us, I also have been in many of your shoes. Started in admissions, I've worked in placement, campus management. So we definitely understand where you guys are, where you're trying to head. We're really excited to be with you guys today. Before we get started, I'm going to cover some housekeeping items with you. So all of you guys will be muted for the duration of our webinar, but if you need to adjust your audio devices or volume, you can do that from your settings. We are going to have polls before each discussion question, so we ask that you participate. Just click on your answer to submit. You can also feel free to comment further on those topics in the chat. And also use the chat for any questions that come up. I'll be monitoring those as well. And we'll also have some time at the end for Q&A.
Awesome. Thanks, Cassie. Okay, so our main goal today is really to discuss how a CRM and SIS integration can positively impact the student and the user experience, right? And maybe how not having an integration impacts you. And then in addition to that, also just talking about some creative things that people are doing with a CRM and SIS integration. So we want to kick it off first with a poll. Rishik, if you could launch that poll for us, that would be great. We are just curious, like, what your level of integration looks like right now. Are any of your systems integrated today? No. Maybe you have CRM and SIS, maybe you have SIS and LMS, or maybe you have all three plus multiple other systems talking to each other? We just want to get an understanding of where you are.
Thanks for taking a minute to answer that for us. That really helps guide our conversation here. And the whole idea here is we can go a lot of different directions, but we want to make sure this is just as valuable for you and as specifically as possible.
Yeah, perfect. And as those questions are rolling in, I will update you all once we have some answers and results. But I'm just going to ask our panelists today, why is a CRM and SIS integration valuable? Just a big open question there.
So I guess I'll.
Yeah, about to say, Alan, please, you're definitely the right person to kick it off.
Well, seeing that I had the integration in my school a few years ago before I came over directly for Diamond, I think that the biggest response is that the focus of a CRM is to maximize your admissions people, their time, their energy, and their focus. And then as it moves into the student life cycle, as they enroll, I think the benefit of having the systems integrated is that constant contact that the integration of the systems can provide and keep the student engaged.
Yeah, and to really build on that, one of the things, and I'll allude to this and talk about it a little bit more later, kind of the quality of integration, but there's a real reason why a CRM, an SIS, and even, we won't talk about it today, but even a learning management system, those are very distinct things. Like you don't really see a combined CRM, SIS too often, or if you do, one of those systems is often very, very limited. So one of the things that we see that's incredibly valuable is using best in class systems. So best, whether it be a Diamond, a Lead Squared, et cetera, we really encourage folks to look at the systems that's right for them. And then what then the imperative is because that sort of naturally is a silo, right? When you're using a specific admission system like a CRM, ideally, you really want just the admission folks in there. And then a specific system like the SIS, you really want your financial aid and academics in there. But what that does, though, is that naturally creates silos. The way to take advantage of that and really make sure you're maximizing and not having just people in all these systems is to be able to have that bridge and be able to have those connectivities of what data that an FA person needs from admissions without having to have that person cross over with systems. And that's where an integration gets incredibly powerful. So it's having the right information for the right person at the right time. And that's why having disconnected systems can be really tough, because if you have to go back, or back to the timeliness, if you have to go back to another system, that can really be time effort could be used better elsewhere. So that was sort of my initial thoughts, and we'll get into some of those points a little bit later, but that was sort of my initial kickoff.
Both great. And I just want to jump back to the poll results really quick. About 50% of you said that you don't have any system integration. And then another 50% either said there's at least one, or maybe you have multiple systems integrated. And we're really gonna, thank you for showing the results again. So about 30% CRM and SIS, and then 20% have multiple systems talking to each other. So we're gonna tackle both sides. We're gonna talk about why it's beneficial to have an integration in general, and some of the things that not having an integration can lead to. And then also, if you already have an integration, we're going to talk about some best practices or creative ideas on what you could do with that integration that maybe you haven't thought of yet. So Douglas, I want to touch on a phrase that you used earlier, silos. Can we talk a little bit about how disconnected systems are perpetuating these departmental silos, and what kind of impact the silos have on the student experience?
Yeah, I'm more than happy to speak to that. And I also want to be clear is that silos are not inherently bad or good. The whole idea here is you want to be able to maximize it. So it'd be interesting to get Alan's thoughts on this. So I'll tee him up for a little bit later. But again, kind of back to the concept of you really want admission people working in an admission system. And SIS is a very powerful system, but it's not necessarily an admission system or an enrollment management system. And so in some cases, you actually want that silo where you really want the admission folks working in admission specific software, being able to do the tasks that they need, being able to take a student from initial interest all the way through someone actually becoming a student, which, as we know, is not the most straightforward journey. You know, it looks like it's linear, but it's really that sort of all over the place graph. So having a system in that sense of a silo is actually really, really powerful and a wise thing to do. With that said, the problem with those silos, then, and kind of back to what I alluded to earlier, is not having the right data at the right time. So for instance, not being able to understand some of the basic data of, you know, first name, last name, email address, all those sort of things like that are really table stakes. That's something that just should be table stakes to have transfer over. The moment you start rekeying from one system to another, you all of a sudden add human error. And that's where, and I'm sure I saw what 25 or 30% of folks don't have integrated systems. My guess is you're doing one of two things. You're either having that data rekeyed, which just introduces human error, and in the process of getting a phone number wrong, that can be devastating. Because all of a sudden you use an access pathway to a student. That's terrible. And it's just like it's a forced, unforced error kind of thing. On the flip side, some of you may be doing a flat file transfer. Absolutely, that's an interesting way to integrate systems. Less error prone. So that's, kind of going from like, oh boy, to like, okay, that'll work. Then the holy grail is integration. That middle standpoint can be good, but the problem is it's not real time. So unless you're doing a data dump file or doing a flat file transfer, on a minute by minute basis, which hopefully you're not doing, you do then lose that connectivity. So again, you're running into the poor FA folks picking up the phone and being like, "Hey, I thought Douglas was in here. I don't have this information." They're like, "Well, I hit the button." So again, like I don't want to get too into the day in the life and the pain points, but just want to kind of show we know what that pain looks like. So that's where those silos can really be painful. And so really eliminating keying is sort of, or hot keying in is really important. And sort of the next level up, flat file is much better. But at the end of the day, you really want to have a solid integration. And we'll get into what a two-way integration looks like. But all those problems with not having the data with the right person at the right time, very painful and also costly to your educational business.
Douglas, I think one of the points of a full integration that we can't downplay is the ability of the other departments to see the whole story, to see the whole student experience on the enrollment process, from the time that they submit the lead to their motivation to coming. I think that particular information being available to the financial aid people, to the registrar, and being able to engage the student after enrollment with that knowledge really enhances the student's experience.
Yeah, I completely agree. So go ahead.
Please, Lauren, go ahead, please.
I was just going to say, I completely agree. I worked in student success first and then admissions second, but we never had notes that were sent between the two systems. And it would be life-changing just to understand the different conversations that the admissions advisor had with a student before they passed them over to me, right? Then you can jump in, read the notes, read a little background, maybe even like ask them about their kids or their career aspirations or where they live, right? Like you have this information at your fingertips that helps you better support the student and build that relationship much faster.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. Like that context really matters. And a lot of times, assuming your admission team's doing exactly what they should do, and let's assume they do, they should have a lot of contextual notes that are really matter, that are really valuable, that is that student or is that person. And to then kind of go to the next screen or the next system and to not have that, you're losing the granularity. You're losing sort of the human aspect of that. So that's actually a fantastic example.
I agree 100%. And just to wrap it all the way around, I think that having that information at your hands, you can preempt some of the challenges that the students are facing by drawing the responses out of the students, particularly the registrar or the success manager within the school, understanding the fact that attendance or transportation or childcare might already be the issue, so you can start those conversations right from the get-go and really connect with the student.
Yeah, exactly. At my school, we had like a high risk questionnaire that admissions had to fill out and email to the student success advisor. But imagine if you had all of that data in the system, you can do so much more with it, right? They can view what may be a risk of them not starting or persisting or something like that. And then, I mean, we could go on for hours just on this topic alone, but building out, predictive analytics on if it, like someone is marked high risk, are they more likely to graduate or less likely to graduate? So I won't get into that, but let's jump into another poll. Audience, we would love to know what your biggest frustration is with disconnected systems. Is it getting the data from one system to another? Maybe you're not able to find the answer that you're looking for, your limited ability to report, or if all three of those are frustrating, all of the above. And please feel free to put other options in the chat. Danny is saying that public APIs of systems would help to communicate. Definitely, that is huge. If systems have public APIs, then it's much easier to integrate the two.
But Lauren, the challenge there is having the resources at a school level to take advantage of those APIs. And although some of our participants certainly do have that, there's a vast majority in the career market that it would be beneficial to have that already taken care of.
Yeah, definitely. You might be reliant on the software teams themselves to do that, or a third party. All right, the results are in. 50% said all of the above. I'm sorry to hear that. 33% said getting data from one system to another. 13% said they're having trouble looking for or finding an answer they're looking for. And then 4% are struggling with reporting. So that's helpful. Thank you so much for answering that. As we continue our discussion, we'll try to tailor our conversation to your feedback. So I want to dive into, we've talked a little bit about this, but how does a connection between a CRM and SIS and the relative departments, how do they work together to provide an easier enrollment experience than if you didn't have those connected?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in, and then Alan, kick it over to you. So one of the subjects that is incredibly important that we haven't touched on yet is the reporting side of things. So coming from an enrollment management admissions background, I know how incredibly important it is to have not only real-time data, but have very accurate stage-by-stage, step-by-step data. And one of the really interesting, powerful things is when you are able to integrate all these systems together, understanding the entire life cycle and the journey as well. So, and even understanding how long it took a student to get from each stage to another can be super powerful. So thinking about how the departments can ultimately work together, I think Lauren, you touched on it really well, is there are different gradients of students. You know, that one student, you're like, oh, they're fine. Like, what they'll enroll, they're good, they're motivated, they're the ones pressuring us to get in for the next start. That student, you don't have to worry about a lot. It's that student that may be on the bubble for whatever reason. Maybe financial aid was hard, maybe transportation's hard. You know, there's a number of different reasons that some of our students can be challenged. And so it's really, really important to know that information. So a classic example from the admission side of things is if you know that someone is going to be financially challenged or coming in with that piece with just a ton of questions, like maybe this is the one and only time they've ever touched financial aid. That is really, really important for a financial aid advisor to know. So maybe that's the student where you schedule extra time with, or maybe send them some additional information ahead of time to prepare for. But if you don't have that set of information, if you don't have that connectivity between departments, and that's where this also becomes not just the software, but actual strategy, making sure departments are talking to each other, that's a huge, not only a huge opportunity, but also a huge loss if you're not transferring that kind of information. So that's sort of one of this more straightforward examples of how each department can work together and how that connectivity can really be facilitated by good interconnectivity of your systems. So Alan, anything to add to that or kind of build on?
Just to build on it, I don't know that I have any additional, but to build on that, I think you hit the nail on the head when you referred to the financial aid process and what about the first family member to apply to post-secondary schools, whether they be career schools, a trade school, or college, university, doesn't really matter. They need some extra help. And for the information for the financial aid officer to know that plays a huge role, that maybe that's why they've stopped in the process. They hit the FAFSA. And let's face it, we all know that 24-25 FAFSA was quite a challenge for everybody. There was lots of efforts to get through that pain. Maybe I quoted that wrong. Maybe it was the 23-4 FAFSA, whatever. This most recent FAFSA that we just got out of. The information is key, right? Information is knowledge and power. And if you empower your people with better information about the prospective students, they, as professionals, can do a better job of keeping the process moving.
Yeah, I completely agree. And just going back to something Douglas mentioned earlier is, the CRM and SIS have very specific uses, right? So you may have teams who really need to use one or the other. Like financial aid is much more appropriate to be using the SIS because they're doing all of their packaging and any kind of financial aid activities. Same with academics, right? But being able to send that information back to the CRM, like what's their ICER status? Did they meet with their financial aid advisor? Like what kind of communication have they had? And so that admissions and financial aid can really work together to support that enrollment process is really powerful. I want to dive it. Yeah.
Lauren, I want to jump in just real quick here. We were kind of focused on that front end, the enrollment process and then financial aid. I don't want to be remiss and talk, and I know Doug said we get to this, but I just want to make sure that everybody understands that the SIS can talk back to the CRM in a full integration scenario and enhance that pull through. Congratulations, you've made it halfway, or we see that you're graduating next week. Be sure to come up and talk to us. Whatever those milestones are, the CRMs can be very powerful if they know what's happening in the student life cycle, and those workflows can be developed within the CRM to enhance that student life cycle all the way through graduation and placement. And I don't want to miss that opportunity.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think we're getting to some probably good examples of some of the questions coming up. But I think, Alan, you hit the nail right on the head as far as CRMs are really powerful, not just for the enrollment management process, but also student success and even into placement. And the really key part of that is, your system of record is your SIS. And then the CRM can be a really powerful system of engagement. So let's not lose sight of that as well, because I know we have folks that are starting from no connectivity. We also have folks on here that have extreme connectivity. So I want to make sure we're providing value across the spectrum here. But I think our next question kind of tees this up really well.
Yeah, this is a perfect segue. I just want us to discuss a few creative ways that some of our customers or other people you've heard with a CRM and SIS integration are using that integration to really support the student experience.
Yeah, so this is like an interesting question here of when do you connect the systems, right? And this is a much more complicated question than you would think. And I think a lot of the initial answer would be like, well, when the student raises their hand and says they want to enroll. it comes down to, what does enroll actually mean? Do you consider an enrollment after you get packaged, which makes total sense? Do you think the moment the student says, I'm ready to enroll, that counts as an enrollment? So I'd encourage everyone from a no system connectivity all the way to folks that are out with extreme two-way connectivity to really be thoughtful about, when do you call something, what is an enrollment? And also, therefore, when do you need information in what system? So a great example of this is, we have a couple customers that want information in their SIS absolutely as soon as possible, because their admissions and financial aid officers work incredibly close together because they have shorter form programs. And so it's critical that all the CRM information is in the SIS as quickly as possible, almost from the point of coming in as a lead. On the other end of the spectrum, we also have folks that really aren't transferring over information until almost everything is done, and they're actually ready to package the student in the SIS. So I'd really encourage you to think about your use case and when it's helpful, because there's certainly pros and cons to both. But that is one of the things, one of the key questions to answer is, when do my people, going back to like the right information at the right time to the right people, when do my people need this information? Because also, on the flip side, if you're a financial aid officer and this person may actually not enroll, you probably don't want their information sitting in your system or your queue. So there's also reasons not to send information to.
Yeah, totally. And to piggyback on that, kind of considering, what do you want to send? Like, what are you sending from the CRM to the SIS? What are you pulling back? What can you do with that information? Right? People do it as limited as like first name, last name, email, phone, or they may send over the full gamut into the SIS. But just want to hear from you all what you're saying.
And I think some of the SISs out there, and to Doug's point about what information do you not want to send, because there is some reporting that is compliant once the information is in the SIS. So it's important to send it to the right part of the SIS as well. So depending upon when you send it is where you want to put it within the SIS.
Yeah, definitely. So going back to something Douglas said earlier, this concept of the CRM as like a system of engagement or system of communication. We like to think of it that way around here, right? Your SIS is always going to be your system of record. You have all of the grades, transcripts, financial aid stuff in there, but you can use your CRM as this system of engagement to maintain communication with people from lead to graduation, and then even after their alumni, right? And a tight integration between the CRM and the SIS really allows that to happen. So one example that I've seen customers doing is pulling in like attendance history from the SIS, and that, or maybe pulling in test scores and using those to flag the student as high risk. Maybe they're not going to show up for school anymore. They're not going to complete the class, or they're going to fail the class, right? And just being able to have your teams have proactive outreach for those people, because you have all of that under one umbrella.
I think that's an excellent point, Lauren, and I really appreciate you making that. And to build on that, let's not forget the successful students too. Lavish love lavishly, right? Build that referral base. So those students that are succeeding, getting straight A's or making the dean's list, or however you notify those students, those mile markers can be pushed back into the CRM to contact those students as well. I see you're doing really well. Congratulations, and really engage the students that are being successful. And perhaps you can create a mentor with that, and you can query them. People love to be recognized, right? We all know that. We all learn, say people's names, Make sure that
Mhm.
you're complimenting them. And I don't want to miss that opportunity because let's face it, a referral to a program is a wonderful way to get leads.
Yeah, and then to talk about the last leg of the stool, so basically we have enrollment, we have student success, and then we have placement. And we all know that a lot of us live and die by those placement rates. It really matters. And I will say, just from a macroeconomic perspective, I'm really glad to see we're having more and more schools acknowledge about the great work they're doing. In a lot of cases, folks are coming to them to hire their students. That's certainly true, and the high demand professions, the nursing, skilled trades, et cetera. So my hope is you're one of those schools that's starting to see that sort of macroeconomics come in your direction. However, that also means it's very, very critical that we're getting good information to students about that. So where you maybe have in the past, you have someone that does this for you, a department, I think this becomes even more critical to get students really good information about the partners you have, about the places they can go, about the placements, about the events you're hosting, where you're if you're a nursing school, someone's coming to your campus. All that information is, as long as you have the interconnectivity of the systems, you can automate all that. You can send that out in blasts. You can really take advantage of the interconnectivity of all these systems to be able to really make sure, again, right message, right student, right time. And there's no better time to engage with a student than when they're about to successfully graduate. So especially when they're looking to take their next step.
Dave in the chat mentioned they ask who is their student's biggest fan and they send success notes to them. So that comes into play with that as well. That's a pretty cool creative idea there.
Creative way to utilize the systems.
Yeah. Biggest fans
Yeah,
can be in working at your school too, right? So going back to referrals and those students about to graduate, we relied heavily on referrals, as most of you guys probably do, for starts. And a lot of times you would get those students who would say, or think at least, you want a referral now, but I haven't talked to you since you enrolled me, 9 months ago. So
Sure.
That's a really important piece. Our reps that did so good with referrals, especially at our graduation ceremonies, were the ones who did those check-ins and rooted them on throughout their entire program. So that's a really big piece of pushing that information back into the CRM too. So admissions isn't digging for information, but they can really easily know what kind of shout outs to give and recognition to give to those students too. So definitely love that biggest fan idea.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on what Alan and Cassie were saying as well about the congratulatory piece and making sure you're celebrating these positive accomplishments as well. We had something called Hoorays for A's. So every time they got an A, we would send them like a fun little quote. But just kind of also tying this back to having an integration is, people remember the relationship they build with their admissions advisor too. Like they would come, I worked at an online university. We always had an on-ground graduation ceremony. So they would fly out to Colorado to attend that. And they would be like searching for their admissions advisor, right? It had been maybe 2 to 3 years since they have worked with this person to get enrolled. And they remember that relationship, right? So the fact that they built such a strong relationship and encourage them. And if you have that system integration, you have the ability to kind of keep up with the student during their career and keep that relationship going. So just wanted to it's very technical talking about an integration, but it has like a real impact on people's lives as well.
Yeah,
and we focus a lot on like the student, but as an admission rep too, almost the same thing. Like I want to know what happened. Like I spent so much time with the student. I got to know them. I know everything in their life, what jobs they've worked the last 2 years, because that's how long it took for them to enroll. Now they're enrolled and what happened? Like I want to know what happened. I'm so invested. So it works the same way. I feel like your admissions team too, that's going to increase their morale to see, so whatever happened, because I think that's a big piece that gets lost.
Yeah, and I think Cassie, you sort of uncovered a hidden gem here. Like, I'm so glad we're talking about the student and putting the student first, but also remembering, the staff that works for your school. and that they're people too. And they, of course, but then they have specific questions like, how did Lauren do? How did Douglas do? Oh, they graduated, they got a job. These are all very important human questions. And I think the other piece, as we're kind of gathering through, it's like, oh, I can do all these things. You're like, oh boy, I can do all these things. Do I need to hire more? All these, like, there's a lot of questions about how to enable all of this. So I also want to make sure we're getting into that piece. And what I'll tell you is you don't need more headcount. You don't need to do a ton of work to enable this. What it is really the thought process behind it and what you want to achieve. That's where you should start. You should never start with the technology. You should really start with what you're trying to accomplish. But what I will say is all the things we talked about today, if you can find time to think about how you want to have your school engage both your students and in this case, Cassie is a great example of your admission reps as well, to keep that momentum sort of naturally going. That's where integrating these systems and working, we're great examples as CRM and SIS experts, but there's lots of great systems out there. So this isn't just about us. This is sort of about the ecosystem. I really encourage you to work with those providers to enable that strategy. And very clearly, like, the way to do this is to have the systems interconnected so this is automated. So when coming back to, like, you don't need to hire a chief of engagement to be able to do all of this. If you thoughtfully can think about where those touch points are, draft the right text message, write emails to enable this can all actually be automated. And that's what the power of the systems is to say, oh wow, Douglas is 3 months away from graduating, because you have that data. Well, that's a great time to let his admission rep know that he's 3 months away from graduating. All of a sudden, Cassie can, as the person she is, maybe gives Douglas a call. And you're like, I'm so excited that you're close. Those are sort of the natural success engagements that can happen when you enable that. So I do want to make sure I'm leaving away the, like, oh gosh, this isn't a whole new initiative. This isn't a new swim lane or vertical or whatever. This is about how you want to engage your students, and then you can enable that with the systems that you have.
And let's not forget, Douglas, let's not forget post-graduation job placement and alumni.
Yes.
Workflows can be developed once the CRM knows that the student is in that status. That workflow can be developed, and you can really stay engaged with your best, your best fans, your best people. And even if they didn't have a plus experience at your school, you can certainly identify that. And again, this relationship, as Cassie was talking about, this relationship should extend past the graduation and should extend, let me go backwards, should extend past that, A on the midterm, or, the completing your clinicals, or whatever milestones that you set within the system, to 6 months out, a year out, and all of that. The CRM can automate that. And to Doug's point, you don't need additional people. The automations exist within the SIS. They exist within the CRM. It's just a matter of being thoughtful of how you want that process to look for your school.
Yeah, and there's a great question in the chat. I want to make sure I highlight it. So Natasha, thanks for throwing this out here. And I'll just read this word for word. Have you seen these systems that are all in one, CRM and SIS, all built into one? Our company has been looking into one that is basically a combined system. So I would say always, again, never start with the technology. So give you some thoughts on this, and I think others will have them as well. Start with what your needs are. If you really need very, very simple systems, like you're going from a spreadsheet to your sort of first CRM or first SIS, there's certainly a world in which that a combined CRM plus SIS systems could be the right answer for you, and not necessarily is. What I will say though is, and I think we kind of started with this, these systems are really powerful and do very specific things. Like a CRM is really meant for enrollment management, and an SIS is really meant for student success and packaging and financing. The world in which you start taking those two very different worlds and systems and start combining them, all of a sudden you have to be very thoughtful about how you're giving access to your admission reps versus your FA versus et cetera. So if you're doing that combined world, you have to be very thoughtful about how you take advantage of making sure that you're not combining too many things, frankly. So my perspective is that there are systems that are out there like that, but because those systems are meant to do so different things, sometimes you get lost in translation. And what usually happens is you kind of throw them together and sort of you shave off the edges, and those edges really matter, and you can find yourself a little bit short. The other thing that I will mention is if you get into some of the really big, expensive, robust systems that say they're all in one, and there's no reason to name any names, but I suspect you know some of the folks I'm talking about. They're one system because of acquisition, not because of being home built. And so the irony of it is someone might come to you and say, we're a CRM SIS combination, we have both. If they came from different worlds and mismatch, it can be a really clunky integration. And that's where I also want to highlight is the quality of the integration is really, really important. There are companies out there that have that scenario where it's a CRM plus SIS, and not to toot our own horn so well, as we actually connect better with their SIS system than they do. So there are some of those ironies. But let me take a step back. So I don't want to, again, don't want to toot our own horns here too hard, but start with strategy. Start with what you need versus start with the technology and go from there.
And I think to Doug's
great
point,
question.
Yeah, great question. And I think to Doug's point, I always tell my clients that, you know, our integration with Lead Squared is very sophisticated, and we partnered with the best in class. We feel that we provide a specialty. We're focused on that SIS part. And again, this is not about Lead Squared and Diamond, it's about CRM and SIS. But when you have an expertise in something, to Doug's point, I think you can lean in on that and then have the partnership, the electrician versus the carpenter. You know, when you try to be everything to everybody, I think there's some of those edges that Doug was referring to that just don't give you the best possible solution. So I would tell I think it's Nadia. I don't see the whole name there,
Natasha,
but
yeah.
I would advise her to look at those systems that are all in one, and see that a sophisticated SIS and a sophisticated CRM that's fully integrated, I don't think you're giving up anything. Maybe you have to write 2 different checks to 2 different companies, but if they have a working relationship, a long-term relationship, a deep relationship, I feel that you're getting exactly what you want in the functionality that you need.
Yeah, and what I'll also throw this out here as well is, you know, if let's say you're approaching Lead Squared or Diamond, Al and I are more than happy to piggyback and work with the account executives you'd be working with to kind of think through and talk through some of those strategies. At the end of the day, like, deeply care about you actually meeting your needs of your students and getting the right system. So if you approach us just saying, hey, like, here's I'm thinking about how to do this, or here's how I'm thinking about strategy, feel free to name us. We're more than happy to jump on calls and kind of guide you and frankly just help you make the right decision for yourselves.
Right, because there's nothing more important than the student success followed by your success, because we can't be successful unless the first 2 take place.
Well said.
Great. Yeah, this is a really important conversation. Thanks for bringing that up, Natasha. I think I want to just cover one more topic before we switch to Q&A. I think it'd be remiss if we didn't talk about reporting and data access that you are allowed if you have a CRM and SIS connection. So how does this integration allow you to create a more holistic picture of the student experience, and what are you doing with that data?
I'm happy to jump in and start. So there is nothing more powerful than having the end-to-end, and I truly mean end-to-end. Like, it's literally like first time you ever hear about the student as a lead, all the way out through actual placement. having that entire journey is incredibly powerful. And that way you know exactly where students are getting stuck. You know where they're being successful. You know where to change your system. And I think we've talked a lot about the enrollment management side. So I actually want to flip to Alan on the Diamond side, because it's the reporting is really powerful on the admission side, but it's a little bit more business focused, and the federal government is not going to ask you for your admission process, or at least hopefully shouldn't. On the flip side, though, they're going to ask you about your reporting for your numbers on placements. They're going to ask you for all that data. So Alan, let me tee you up to have that conversation.
Yeah, there's no question. Any good, sophisticated SIS can provide the necessary documentation and reporting to satisfy the compliance. That's why you have an SIS. Listen, we don't do in the SIS world, we don't do anything that you can't do manually on spreadsheets. What we do is we automate those processes, and we control the flow of information, right? So you can query the system and get your responses to whatever it is that you need. And I think in the nature of this webinar, I think it's a holistic approach that really benefits the school, the management of the business of the school. That is the key to the integration as far as reporting goes. And let me just give you the scenario here. You get a lead in, you have lead sources, you're spending a lot of money on lead sources, whether it's Google AdWords, or maybe you're buying phrases, or you're buying leads, whatever the source is, your website, whatever the source is there a relationship between that source and graduation? And only if you have the integration can you identify that Douglas graduated and came from Facebook, ad number 2, right? So now you know that, then you can start looking at that and look at ad number 2 and how successful it was, and in the time frame that it was successful. You know, an ad that appeals to Doug doesn't appeal to me. We're of different generations. And I know all of the clients that we have span generation over generation. You know, it's not just high school graduates, right? And even within the high school graduates, 10 years ago, that high school graduate responded differently than they do today. And being able to see that holistic approach to the student base and the success base will really give you some powerful data to then plot your course forward.
Yeah, and let me get even a little bit more tactical. So let's say that you have a program mix. My guess is there's some programs you have very little trouble filling, and others that you need to work a little bit harder to fill. So understanding where the leads are coming from that are actually filling those programs then answers the question of, if I have $1 to spend, where do I spend my next dollar to strategically get the right student into that harder to fill program versus that wasted dollar of that student that probably is going to come into the other program anyway. And that is a perfect example of utilizing both the data and the integrated systems to solve real business problems of, hey, I need help fill out this class. This is the program that needs some help. Where do I spend $1, or where do I spend my time, just as important, to actually make the outcome I'm looking for? And that is only possible through the interconnectivity of all this and through the reporting of all of this. The power of it can't be sort of overstated. And also, I want to also be clear of, like, come work with us and have a conversation about it, but this is not a Herculean effort. We can do this for you, and any good CRM and SIS provider should be able to. But this is where, like, please come have a conversation with us. We would love to, like, this is the fun stuff. So I'll stop there because I could talk about this all day.
I can't help myself, but the key there, Doug, is that graduate, right? With all the pressure that we're facing right now with gainful employment and success rates and completion rates and all of that stuff, let's not forget where we spend that dollar to get the right student. And that's the integration all the way back to where are you getting your students from will give you the right outcomes within those programs.
Yeah, that's fantastic. All right, thank you, everyone. So I want to switch over to Q&A, but Douglas, Alan, Cassie, any kind of final thoughts before we open it up to the audience?
No, I think the biggest thing I want to leave everyone with before we go to this is one, this is, as long as it's done well, this is completely doable. This isn't a Herculean effort. Come talk to the experts, not just us, and we can show you how it's done. And then two, just to thank you for the work that everyone does. I think if you've been to CQ, I think CQ does a really great job of highlighting and showing the power of what we do as an industry. And I don't think we say thank you enough to everyone. You are creating the nurses, carpenters, the infrastructure that is the US. And I want to make sure we never lose sight of that. So, thank you for the dirty jobs. We appreciate that. So let's open up the Q&A.
Yeah, good. Thank you there, Doug.
All right, perfect. And thank you so much to our panelists. We just have one quick poll while we're jumping into the Q&A. Please start putting your questions in the chat and we'll be happy to answer them. But our last poll is just, we talked about how a strong CRM and SIS integration can really help increase student engagement, right? Would you like to know how? Are you interested in talking more to us? We'd love to know.
I wish I could vote, Lauren. I want everybody to say yes to that.
Yeah.
And if you do have any questions, please put them in the chat.
So I did get one question off chat just personally. So I'll throw that out there. So the question was a good one. It's like, are there systems that don't integrate? And the answer is absolutely yes. So just to give you a sense, when you're looking at systems, one of the questions you should ask is, can you integrate? So important. And then how do you integrate? And there's two answers to that question. The right answer is application program interfaces, or APIs. If a system does not have an API, run. That's my very strong opinion. The other way to integrate is through a flat file transfer, and you can do things like upload it to an FTP site and do things like that. My suggestion is there's no reason to be using 1990s technology. If a company doesn't have APIs, run. So that was a really good, thank you for pinging me with that one. So that's just a good one, is if you're looking at systems, make sure that they can do that. Yeah.
Perfect. I got a direct chat too. Do you have any tips for someone who is starting to tackle an SIS and CRM integration?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. So, and I think I've said it a couple of times, but repetition is really important. Know your process and know your strategy first. It's always technology second. So the way I would think about it and start is, first, at a very high level, what do I want to accomplish with the integration? Two, do I want it to be multi-directional, or is it okay to have it unidirectional going from the CRM to SIS? Because that'll heavily influence your level of effort and what you do. And then three, I get real tactical about like, what information do I need to know and when? And if you do those kind of steps of those pieces, you're going to be 95% of the way there, and there's always sort of some cleanup.
And I think that another